small village at the edge of a dry valley, there lived a woman named Savitri. She was 51 years old. She had been a widow for 3 years. She owned a single room, a cooking pot, a worn cotton sari, and on her wrists, always on her wrists, a set of gold bangles that her husband had given her on their wedding day 32 years before. The bangles were the last physical thing that connected her to him. She had sold nearly everything else in the years since his death. The furniture, the livestock, the small plot of land that had fed them for 2 decades. The bangles she kept because some things are not valued in the language of money, and she had told herself on every difficult morning that she would keep them until the last possible day. The village had no school. The nearest one was 17 kilometers away, a distance that meant nothing to a car and everything to a child with no shoes. 53 children in that village had never sat in a classroom. They grew up watching the sky and the dirt, learning the boundaries of the world that had been assigned to them before they were old enough to question it. Savitri had watched this for 3 years. She had watched the children the way you watch something that is wrong in a world that has decided it is simply normal. And on a Tuesday evening in October, watching a girl of 9 years drawing shapes in the dirt because she had nothing else to do with her mind, Savitri made a decision that her empty hands had no practical right to make. The next morning she removed the bangles. She held them in her palm for a long time. She said something to them. Not a prayer exactly, but the private kind of goodbye that you say to the things that belong to someone you loved before you release them into a purpose you believe they would have wanted. She walked 17 kilometers to the nearest town. She sold the bangles to a gold merchant for less than they were worth because she did not know how to negotiate and because she was in a hurry to begin. She walked back the same 17 kilometers, the same day, with money in her hand and nothing on her wrists for the first time in 32 years. She used the money to rent the unused room at the edge of the village that had sat empty for 4 years. She bought chalk, a second-hand blackboard, and notebooks that she had negotiated down to the price she could afford. She sent word through the village that anyone who wanted to send their child to learn should bring them on Monday morning. On Monday morning they came, not all 53 at once. Some parents were uncertain, some children were afraid of something they had never seen before. But 22 children arrived on the first day, and Savitri stood at the door of a room with a blackboard and chalk and the absence of gold on her wrists, and she began. She had only completed her own schooling to the 8th standard, but she knew enough to begin. And she knew that beginning was the only thing that separated the children in that room from the version of their lives that the dirt outside had been waiting to keep them in. She taught what she knew. She learned what she didn't. She stayed later than the children every evening, preparing tomorrow's lesson by lamplight. By the end of the first month, all 50 children had come. Parents who had been uncertain watched their children come home. In the evenings, reciting letters and numbers with the specific electric joy of a mind that has just discovered it is capable of more than it was told. Word traveled to the next village, and the village after that. A district education officer visited 4 months later, drawn there by a report that someone had started a school in a village with no school, funded by nothing the government had been told about. He found 50 children. He found a woman with no formal teaching qualification and no gold on her wrists. He found a classroom that functioned better, by every measure of attention and learning, than several formally funded schools in the district. Savitri never replaced the Bangles. Not when the school received government recognition. Not when donations arrived from people who had heard the story. Not when the first of her 50 children passed a state examination and dedicated the result to her in a letter she kept folded inside the cover of the register, where she had written every child's name on the first day. She said when asked that the wrists were a good reminder, that empty wrists for her meant full classrooms, and that was a trade she would make again without a moment's hesitation.